This is a Bugatti Chiron, and it is currently the fastest production car you can buy. It'll do 1 miles per hour. It's also the most powerful production car you can buy. Back here is an 8-liter quad turbocharged 6-cylinder engine that makes 15 horsepower. It's also the most expensive new production car you can buy. The base price of this car is just a shade under $3. Today, I'm going to take you on a tour of it. Now, I've borrowed this Chiron from Bugatti, who's pretty much the only people. It's organized by Grand Touring Autos here in Toronto, in Ontario, Canada. Grand Touring Autos is the Bugatti dealer here in Toronto, and they also have a few other exotic brands, Lamborghini, Bentley, Rolls-Royce, etc. And they're opening a new location, and so Bugatti lent them this car, but that's tomorrow. Today, I drive it. And I sincerely hope I don't get to all the important stuff. Bugatti, as you probably know, has a history of cars and race cars that goes back over a century. Volkswagen bought them about 20 years ago and eventually released the Veyron, which was the fastest car of time. But the original Veyron had only 1,000 horsepower and it could only do 53 miles an hour, two numbers that simply had to be bested. And so there's this. The Chiron has 15, which, to be clear, is 6. The base price is $2.9 before options, which are surely plentiful and extravagant. The Chiron is also the fastest production car in the world available right now. It'll do 260 miles an hour, although it's not quite as fast as the world record edition of the Veyron, which was its predecessor. That could hit almost 2. Not that anyone will ever do that speed, of course, but you could. Anyway, today I'm going to take you on a twerks and features, which are plentiful. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the Chiron, click the link below to visit autotrader.com. I've compiled a list of the most expensive cars currently listed for sale on Auto, which is a very distinctive shape. They call it a horseshoe, and it has been a characteristic shape on Bugattis going back to the start of time. My favorite Bugatti that used it was the EB110, which had a totally different front end that didn't really work with the grille, and yet they incorporated it anyway because Bugattis must have this grille. Another thing I like up front is the LEDs in the headlights. The design of them, the look of them is very cool. It is a very nice look. These are just the regular running lights. They don't actually flicker when you see this car on the street. The headlights, they come on in the middle of the outer two running lights, turn on the brights, and they turn on in between the inner. But my favorite is the turn signals, which appear as 4 with the LED running lights, which is a really cool look. We aren't done with the front of the Chiron yet. Another interesting item with the headlights is the welcome. And you approach the Chiron, the LEDs turn on, and they don't just turn on, they turn on in sort of a pattern to welcome the experience. The to see due to the camera frame rate, but basically as you approach the car, they first light up one at a time at half brightness from the outside. The brakes. That's right, there is a channel from the headlights to the brakes in this car, and it keeps the brakes cool, maximum stopping power. Another cool channel you'll see in the front in the Chiron is down here in the bump thing. It sort of starts in the front and ends right on the inside of the wheel arch. It turns out that's functional. That's actually designed to make it just a little bit slipperier so the car can achieve better acceleration and high speeds. Speaking of brake cooling, the front brakes in this car are 6.5 inches, which is just massive. That's a pretty good size for most cars, and in this car, it's the brakes. So you can see why they would need to be cool. But back to the grille for a minute. Next I want to discuss you can see the Bugatti emblem is front and center in the grille, and Bugatti says that this is the one part of the car that they made unnecessarily heavy when it didn't have to be. That's because the Bugatti emblem is made, of course it is. It really sort of drives home the luxury car point. And next up we move on to the trunk, which is lid itself. Take a look at the design of this trunk lid. It sort of looks like that's a very cool piece when it's opened. Now on top of the trunk lid, you can see this car is been finished, and the Bugatti people told me it meets in the center itself. Now opening the trunk is done just like a lot of other sports cars. You pull a little latch and it opens right up. And there are a couple of interesting things you'll find once you get under here. The first, big black metal divider, and people about that, and they told me that the rule is in the North American market, if your trunk is a certain uninterrupted interior trunk handles inside the trunk, just enough so they could avoid this regulation. And that is why only the North American Chiron models have this. Now, a couple of other interesting things you will find in the Bugatti says it is sized to store a carry-on bag. North American version with the divider in it is a little bit hampered for the trunk, but nonetheless, that was the original design. Interesting interesting item in the trunk. You will see over on the right side a little sort of piece of luggage that's strapped in there, an Alcantara kit. This car obviously doesn't have enough room for tires, so instead you unzip that and you get the tire inflator to fit perfectly on the side of your trunk. Also interesting items inside the trunk, one of which is right above it for every Chiron, and it says Bugatti is going to build 500 of these for the entire world. To the side of the Chiron, where you can see that the most visually obvious and interesting item is this line that sort of goes along the entire side of the car. They call this the Bugatti, which is obviously important for an engine this large. A couple of interesting things about the Bugatti. One is that it's this giant aluminum that starts all the way down here and finishes all the way back there. It is absolutely massive. One other interesting item on the side of the car, you can see that right behind the front window, behind the door, you have the fuel door. You just tap it and it opens right up, and then you can see, well, actually it isn't the fuel door at all. Instead, that's where you put in oil into the engine. The fuel door is on the other side, the exact same size and shape, and you open it the exact same way, but that one has a picture of a little gas pump on it as opposed to the little oil lamp on the other side. Next, we move on to the back of the Chiron, where there are a couple of interesting items worth mentioning. I'm going to start with the engine itself. You can see that printed on the engine it says W16 on one side and 1500 on the other side, representative of how many horsepower this car has. Also, you can see the two Bugatti logos printed there on the engine. That's kind of a cool little touch. One interesting item about the engine, though, is it can't be accessed. You cannot actually open this to get into the engine, so you can't tinker on your Chiron by yourself, which frankly is probably a good thing. That's why the oil cap is over there on the side looking like the fuel cap, so if you want to add oil, you can do it through there. Otherwise, the engine is best to be left to the professionals. One other interesting item in the vicinity of the engine, you can see that line that goes across the center of the engine. It goes right down the middle. Well, that line actually goes down the entire car. It's carried throughout the entire vehicle, including in the interior, which I'll show you in just a minute. Next up, a couple of other interesting traits back here. Now, obviously, you can see the brake lights on either side. That's no surprise, but there's also this red strip of light that goes down the entire middle of the back of this car.